explain that. So thank you all for coming. I do want to introduce Rachel Terragard here, who is Line 9 here. Awesome runner lady, and I'm not going to talk for her so she can tell you everything she's been doing.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's the reason we're here. So
thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit. First of all, I wanted to say I've been honored on the run to have run through territories that are recognized as being First Nations territories. They are all, of course, Indigenous territories. People live here, but I so far have been through Aamjinaang, the Chippewas, the Thames, and Six Nations. And I wanted to just talk about the Tuura Wampum a little bit, because when I went to Six Nations, that was one of the things that the chief said to me is duty to consult. When we're talking about those two canoes, right? There's the settler canoe and there's the Indigenous people in one canoe, and they are going along together, and the idea is neither is going to steer the other's boat. Duty to consult is with the settlers. That is the settlers' job. Consent comes from Indigenous people, and that relationship needs to be recognized. I wouldn't be here. My ancestors were starved white people who washed up like on the side of an ocean on land they didn't know. And all of these original treaties, all these treaties are codified in the Indigenous tradition because there were millions of people here who were recognized nations and created these treaties that were meant to be respected. There is no way that my European ancestors would have survived if Indigenous people had not allowed them to. If Indigenous people had said, hey, do you know what? No, you can't come here. None of this would be here. Not a single white person would be here. That is the end of the story. So those treaties need to be respected. If we're going to say that, you know, the treaties eventually created like the Canadian Constitution, if we're going to respect the Canadian Constitution, we're saying Section 35. That's the duty to consult. That falls with settlers. If there's going to be a settler state, we must consult. It's enshrined. If we're going to be here, we have to consult with First Nations. This is not our land. White people don't get to go anywhere they want in the world and set up borders and say this is now, you know, I don't care which book. I don't care if you really like Judy Blume and you say this is not Judy Blume land. I don't care who wrote what Catholic. I don't care. You don't get to do that off of any book. And that's what Line 9 essentially is. It's just all these Indigenous people are being forced to have this pipeline on their land, and it's force that's being done, you know, not necessarily like the way we say done with force, like with a knife, right? It's force with paper. We have to oppose this. We have to recognize that it's paper, and as settlers, we get to just, you know, print off all the paper we want and get, live comfortable lives if we want to. That's not appropriate. We must fight this. There's people who, we talk about Aamjinaang, 3-to-1 girl to boy birth ratio. People are dying. That's 40% of the petrochemical industry in so-called Canada is centered around one tiny Indigenous community. 63 petrochemical plants are right there. That's what's creating this comfortable life, this so-called comfortable life that, by the way, like at the rate of extraction, guess what? You have maybe 16 years. I hope you enjoy it. Just kidding. You better fucking change. Yeah, at the end of the day, we need to not use tar sands. That's basically the plan with Line 9, is to make a new Fort Mac with Aamjinaang, is to create more bitumen refineries. That's why they want Line 9, is so they can take more tar sands, they can expand the tar sands, they can create more destruction for Indigenous communities, more cancer, more rare cancers for Indigenous communities, and then all of that, which of course all filters in the groundwater, so we're all getting cancer. Don't worry, you're not left out. And then of course you have this new, more chemicals in Aamjinaang. It's unacceptable. It has to stop. There's no excuse. Nobody is important enough for this. There's no one. No one is that genius that they deserve this system to work for them. The system must be abolished. And Line 9 is a perfect example of why people need to wake up to that. People need to understand, need to recognize their place, right? We need to recognize where we are We need to recognize whose land this is. We need to give it back. There's nothing stopping white people from giving the land back. We're all here. We've got a chance to do it. Let's do it. And it's only going to keep working, right? Because these projects, stuff like Line 9, I guess I'll talk quickly about the Line 9 project. Line 9 is a 40-year-old pipeline. It was built to last 40 years. Any math experts here who want to like raise red flags, feel free, yell out. It's okay. We're all friends. So yeah, built to last 40 years, built to carry conventional crude. Conventional crude is oil. When it spills in water, you can skim it off. It's still really destructive and gross, but you can skim it off. What Enbridge wants to do with Line 9 is they want to switch the they've already done it. They have now switched the contents from conventional oil to tar sands crude, which the pipeline was not designed to carry. What they also have done is they have switched the flow. So it was carrying African and Middle Eastern oil out from Montreal to Sarnia. Now it's carrying tar sands crude, diluted bitumen, out to Montreal where it can be refined and then exported by tanker out to the Atlantic. No one is like getting warm houses from this, in case anybody cared about that. Tar sands crude, diluted bitumen, at 11 degrees Celsius is as thick as a hockey puck. So to make that move from so-called Sarnia to so-called Montreal through a 637-kilometer pipeline, you have to dilute it with toxic and corrosive chemicals. These chemicals are so corrosive that they thin the wall of a brand new pipeline up to 95%. In Keystone 1 in Alberta, we saw thinning to the 10th of a thickness of a dime. That's how thin the wall of this brand new pipeline was. So now that's what they're shipping through this Line 9, which has had 35 reported spills in its lifetime. That's almost one per year, and Enbridge is notorious for not reporting spills, so who knows, it could be in the hundreds. Line 9 is filled with cracks and dents. Enbridge cannot measure accurately the number of cracks and dents because the technology they use has a 20% margin of error in detection. Cracks and dents to Enbridge are called pipeline features. So they're pipeline feature detection equipment. Again, yeah, 20% margin of error. If I tell you have cancer but like 20% chance I'm wrong, you're gonna think I'm a pretty shoddy doctor if I were a doctor, right? So that's an unacceptable standard academically or professionally. Enbridge has done the exact same thing before. In 2010, they took Line 6B, which is a 30-inch pipeline, 30-inch diameter pipeline, same size as Line 9. It's 40 years old, same age as Line 9. Same type of pipeline. It's got a single layer of tape, which is like a really old, outdated way of making these pipelines. So same exact project, basically. They switched it from conventional to tar sands crude, and it spilled 500,000 liters into the Kalamazoo River, which has yet to be cleaned up. The other thing about diluted bitumen is when it spills, as it inevitably does, it does not float on water like conventional oil, it sinks. So cleaning up oil from the bottom of a river is impossible, as was learned in Kalamazoo. People there are still having seizures to this day. The oil has not been cleaned up. Enbridge didn't tell anybody to evacuate for a week. People were living in the area, breathing the air, drinking the water. That's benzene. People now have that in their systems, continue to have that in the system, and the Kalamazoo River is opened up again. People are rafting down it because it's totally safe, right? That's what Enbridge says. Enbridge says it's totally clean. Activists will go down, stick a stick in the mud, stir it up a little bit, and tar sands crude floats to the surface, and you can just snatch it with your fingers because it's right there. They didn't clean it up, they covered it up with sand and left. Line 9 has a 90% chance of rupture within the first 5 years, as determined by an expert. That is an absolute guarantee that the Grand River, the St. Lawrence River, all these ecologically sensitive waterways that lead to the Great Lakes can and will be contaminated by a major spill. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It's happening now. It has to stop. It has no consent from First Nations. It's threatening millions of lives. If you plan on evolving out of drinking water, congratulations, I don't know why you're here. You've got it all set. The rest of us have to figure it out. Because if we would like to survive drinking water, we need to protect it. And that's what I'm doing here today, hopefully running against Line 9. I hope other people join me. I hope that we end all pipelines, no tankers, no trains, no tar sands. We have to keep it in the ground. We have other ways, We're like the products of millions of years of evolution, guys. We got this, okay? Like the oil, it's millions of years of solar energy, right? It's microorganisms at the bottom of the ocean that over millions of years decompose, filter through porous rock, hit semi-porous rock. We tap that and drill it. In 100 years, we burned all that up, and that's why it's December and like I could be wearing shorts. We can choose better. Let's do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. So thanks all for coming. I guess like to say a couple closing up words. Everything she was talking about made me think about like there are other struggles going on right now in Ontario. I'm from Hamilton, for instance. Enbridge was just in Hamilton a month or so ago to talk about doing new construction on line 10 now, which also goes through Hamilton. They want to expand it, I think 20 centimeters or something like that, you know. And there was like this really cool couple of people like went down and talked against line 9 of the thing, and someone wrote this really great speech and they got quoted in the paper saying, you know, no line 10, not, what was it? No line 10, not at all, not old, not new. And that's basically what Rachel's saying. You know, and if I want to go back to, we want to try to find some way to loop this all back to the statue project, I guess we could say when Dr. Max Blau came out with his guiding principles that he wanted the committee to decide on whether or not this project was good going forward, he phrased the first question something like this. Can these statues of 22 prime ministers be displayed in a way that will inspire the public to learn more about these figures, the times they lived in, and why Canada became known by many as one of the best countries in the world? That's how he phrased his question. And when I stood in front of the Board of Governors last week, I said, you know what, that question is extremely leading. It's extremely biased, and I think if you're going to ask that question, you have to ask the best in what and for who. Because if you're talking to Indigenous people, it's not even on the radar. So I think it's really telling. So I want to say thank you to Rachel. She's running. I don't know for how long. Like how many more weeks are you running?
Probably, I gotta be back at school for beginning of January, so.
So hopefully before school gets back in, she's done running to Montreal. We can all send her our love and thoughts and everything like that. And you know, if you see things propping up against line 9, you know, go down, help, get involved, do something, you know, like she was saying, it was a very inspiring speech, you know, so be inspired by that and stand up against these